In this video, we are going to talk about and practice using the formula to calculate area of trapezoids. So we're going to go ahead and start with the formula. So it looks kind of complex, but when we break it down, it ends up being pretty simple. So our formula is area equals 1/2 times the height, and then in parentheses, we find the sum of base 1 and base 2. So I want you guys to go ahead and write that down in your notebook. Okay, so H stands for the height. So just like we found the height of parallelograms and triangles, it's the same idea here. It's going to be indicated by this line that has that right angle marking. That number with that line is our height from the top base to the bottom base. So we've got two bases here instead of just the one we've been dealing with in our other shapes. And the one thing we do need to remember is that base 1 and base 2 are parallel to one another. So go ahead and write that note in your notebook. Okay, so as a refresher, when two lines are parallel to one another, that means they will never cross. So you can think about like railroad tracks. Those two sides, those two tracks will never cross. So when we're looking at a picture, and I'm going to go back to the last slide, base 1 and base 2, if we were to draw those lines and continue those a little longer, they would never cross. So that's going to be how we determine which two sides are our bases. So we're here going to be given the height, base 1 and base 2. So sometimes we'll be given a picture of a trapezoid. Other times we'll just be given the information. So here we're just given the information. So just like, again, when we've been using our other area formulas, we always start with writing the formula first. So here we've got A equals 1/2 times the height, and then in parentheses, base 1 plus base 2. And the more we write that formula when we practice, the more we're going to remember it. So our next step, like in every area problem, is we're going to plug in the values that we know. So we have A equals 1/2 times the height. Here, our height is 6 inches. And then in parentheses, base 1 plus base 2. So base 1 is 9 plus base 2, which is 11. So now at this point, what we need to do is follow our order of operations, or PEMDAS. That's going to be important for this formula. So we need to do what's in parentheses first. So there's going to be a few more lines than just the 3 or 4 we've been used to. So we're going to copy down what we haven't used yet, 1/2 times 6. And we're going to add, we're going to find the sum of 9 and 11, which is 20. And so now we're left with just multiplication. Because remember, when we have a number right next to a set of parentheses, that means to multiply. So we're going to take 1/2 of 6. So I've got area equals, and then 1/2 of 6 is just taking 6, dividing it by 2. So that would be 3 times our 20. And now we've got our final step is just to multiply those two numbers together. And we've got 3 times 20 is 60. Our units are inches. So our label is going to be inches. And then again, since this is area, area is always squared. Okay, let's go ahead and move on to our second one. Again, remember, as we're going through these, follow along in your notebook, write these down. They're going to be your notes for this section. So again, find the area with a trapezoid with height h and bases b1 and b2. The reason we have these 1s and 2s here is to just differentiate, tell the difference between the two different bases. If we use the same letter, just B and B, we would think it would be the same value. But since they're two different bases, they could have two different lengths. So we need to make sure we tell the difference between the two. So here we've got the height of 14 meters, base 1 is 21 meters, and base 2 is 22 meters. So again, like I said before, we need to write our area formula. So A equals 1/2 times the base, or excuse me, 1/2 times the height, and then in parentheses, base 1 plus base 2. We're going to do our plug-in step. So 1/2 times our height is 14. And then our two bases, 21 and 22. 21 plus 22. And we follow our order of operations. So it tells us to do parentheses first. So I go through and copy everything I don't use. So 1/2 times our height, which is 14. And then in parentheses, when I find the sum of 21 and 22, I get 43. So then from here, I'm going to do half of 14. So if I cut 14 in half, I get 7 multiplied by our 43. And this one, I'm going to have to do the math to the side. So 43 multiplied by 7 should get 301. And then our label for area for this one is meters, and we always square our area. So 301 meters squared. So now our second two examples are going to be actual trapezoids, so pictures of trapezoids. And then from that picture, we're going to have to decide the height and the two bases. So here we've got a picture of a trapezoid. We're going to ignore this number here. And we need to first decide our height and our two bases. So what I want you to do first is copy down this picture into your notebook, label everything that we have here. So copy down this picture, and then we are going to identify the height, base 1, and base 2. Okay, so like I said in the very beginning of this video, the height is always going to be by that line that's marking this 90-degree angle. So this line here. So our height is 6 inches. It's also, for this shape, going to be the number that's attached to this line that touches both base 1 and base 2. So here our height is 6 inches. Now our two bases, it doesn't matter which one is base 1 and which one is base 2. All we need to decide is, out of the three numbers, which two sides are the parallel sides. So this 7.7 inches and this 2.3 inches, those are the two sides that are parallel. So those would be our two bases, base 1, base 2. I'm just going to pick 7.7 to be base 1 and then 2.3 to be base 2. So make sure you have this written down next to your picture. And we are going to start our process. Let's write down the formula. Area equals 1/2 times height, in parentheses, base 1 plus base 2. Again, the more you write that formula, the easier it is going to be for you to remember it. So we've got A equals 1/2. The height is 6. And then our two bases, base 1 was 7.7 plus base 2, which is 2.3. So we need to do what's in parentheses first. So we're going to copy down what we don't use. Area equals 1/2 times 6. And then in parentheses, when we find the sum of those two bases, we get 10. So our decimals go away, which is nice for us. Then we've got half of 6. So we have area equals 3 times our 10. Now our last step is just to multiply those two together. So we get 30, and our label is inches. It's going to be inches squared. Okay, last example, just to find the area of the trapezoid. Again, I want you to go ahead and copy this picture down. And then I want you to attempt to identify the height, base 1, and base 2. So we got our height of 5 millimeters. And then remember, our two bases are the sides that are parallel. So we've got the 8 millimeters, the 4 millimeters. So we're going to do 8 and 4 there. Again, it does not really matter which one's base 1 and which one's base 2, as long as you pick for your two bases the two sides that are parallel. So again, we're going to start with our formula. Area equals 1/2 times height, in parentheses, base 1 plus base 2. I bet at this point you have it almost memorized. We're going to plug in our values. So you've got 1/2 times the height, which we have 5, and then in parentheses, base 1 is 8, base 2 is 4. So following our order of operations, we're going to do what's in parentheses first. So 8 plus 4, we get 12. Now this one's slightly different, because if we do half of 5, we would get a decimal, which honestly is not that big of a deal, but we like to deal with things that are whole numbers. So because this line is all multiplication, 1/2 times 5 times 12, we can actually multiply in any order we want. So I'm actually going to do 5 times 12 first, because in my head, that's a math fact, and it also gives me a whole number. So I'm going to bring down this 1/2 times the product of 5 and 12, which is 60. So then when we get to this point, half of 60 is a little bit easier to do. So half of 60 gives us 30. And then again, our label is millimeters, so it's going to be 30 millimeters squared. Make sure all of those notes are in your notebook, because these are going to be the notes for finding area of trapezoids. And go back to any section you may need to rewatch to help you out. But again, big things to take away: formula, plug-in step. Take as many steps as you need to solve. I like to usually have about 5 on each one of these. And make sure for your 2 bases, you're picking the sides that are parallel, meaning they will never cross.